Welcome to Digital Disguise, a podcast channel dedicated to bringing you true crime stories from around the world. In these episodes, we will be talking about cases and giving our own views. We do not glorify any murder or crimes committed, simply just give our views and try and discover a logical understanding on why these crimes have been committed. Our thoughts go out to anyone involved and also their families. Robert Maudsley was born on the 26th of June 1953, the fourth of 12 children. Whilst Robert was a baby, he and his siblings Paul, Kevin and Brenda had been sent to an orphanage due to parental neglect. Over the next 6 years, Robert and his siblings would be raised by the nuns at the Nazareth House, Roman Catholic, in Crosby, Merseyside. Robert's brother Paul, in a more recent interview, said, "This was a relatively happy time." After spending most of their early years in the Nazareth House, Robert and his siblings had returned back to their family home in Toxteth, Liverpool. Upon arrival, they had found that their parents had conceived 4 more children, and surprisingly, despite only just leaving the orphanage, the young children were subjected to horrifying, systematic physical abuse. Robert's brother Paul had said, "At the orphanage, we had all got on really well. Our parents would come to visit, but they were just strangers. The nuns were a family, and we all used to stick together. Then our parents took us home, and we were subjected to physical abuse. It was something we had never experienced before. They just picked on us one by one, they gave us a beating, and sent us back to our room." The worst was reserved for Robert, and he was regularly abused by his parents. Robert would later claim he was also SA'd as a child. Robert later said, "All I remember of my childhood is the beatings. Once I was locked in a room for 6 months and my father only opened the door to come in and beat me 4 or 6 times a day. He used to hit me with sticks or rods, and once he bust a .22 air rifle over my back." Robert was eventually taken away by social services and placed in a number of foster homes. His father George had told the rest of the family that young Robert had died. Robert, now in his teenage years, moved to London. But this wasn't a great move, as Robert had become addicted to drugs and even resorted to prostitution to fund his addiction. It was during Robert's time as a rent boy when he was picked up by a builder named John Ferrell on March the 14th, 1974. John had picked up Robert to take him back to his flat in North London for sex. When the pair were at the flat, John had produced some photographs. These photographs had been of a young girl that John Ferrell had SA'd. Upon seeing these photographs, the then 21-year-old Robert flew into a fit of rage and slowly killed John by strangulation. While strangling John, Robert stayed watching as the powerless John Ferrell's face turned blue before hitting him over the head with a hammer. After being arrested for the murder of John Ferrell, Robert was found unfit to stand trial, resulting in the 21-year-old being sent to Broadmoor Hospital for the criminally insane, where Robert would spend 3 years. In this time, Robert had been assessed by doctors who believed that his early childhood abuse left him with deep psychological scars. 3 years later, on February the 26th, 1977, Robert would go on to commit yet another murder alongside another Broadmoor inmate named David Cheeseman. Robert led another inmate by the name of David Francis into a cell to then quickly barricade the door and tie David Francis up with the flex that he had obtained from a record player. 26-year-old David Francis was a suspected child abuser. Both Robert and David Cheeseman had tortured David Francis to death over the period of almost 10 hours. As Robert had barricaded the cell from the inside, the prison officers could hear everything, but they couldn't access the cell. Unable to help, any chance that David Francis had of surviving was in full control of Robert and David Cheeseman, and by the time the prison officers broke through the door, David Francis was dead. Despite killing a fellow inmate at Broadmoor, unlike the first murder, Robert was found fit to stand trial and was convicted for the manslaughter of David Francis, even though it was clearly premeditated. After the trial, Robert was sent to Wakefield Prison in West Yorkshire, also named Monster Mansion. Robert was reportedly unhappy with the move and requested to go back to Broadmoor, but this request would quickly be denied. Several days into Robert's sentence in Wakefield Prison, he would go on yet another killing spree. On the afternoon of July the 28th, 1978, Robert would commit his most notorious murders. His first victim of the day would be 46-year-old Sawney Darwood. Sawney, a murderer serving a sentence for the manslaughter of his wife, named Blanche, was invited by Robert to enter his cell. Upon entering, Sawney would be strangled and stabbed to death. Robert now was Sawney's lifeless body. Robert attempted to hide the body under his bed. When satisfied, Robert went back out onto his wing to look for more victims. Looking for more victims would be a hard task, as inmates were already aware that he's a monster in the mansion. Thought to be an unpredictable psycho, inmates would stay clear. One inmate who served time with Robert had said they could all see the madness in his eyes. Eventually, the search paid off for Robert when he entered the cell of 56-year-old Bill Roberts. Bill had been convicted for essaying a 7-year-old. Once Robert was in Bill's cell, he cornered Bill and started stabbing him to death. Robert then armed himself with a makeshift dagger believed to be made from a spoon, and then hacked Bill Roberts' skull open and then smashed his head against the cell's wall. After the murder of Bill Roberts, Robert then walked into the prison officer's guard room and calmly placed a serrated homemade knife on the guard's table, informing them that there will be 2 names less when it comes to the next roll call. When officers found Bill's lifeless body, they allegedly found a spoon sticking out of his skull, and it appeared that Robert had eaten part of his brain. Robert had always denied these allegations. In 1979, during a trial for the murders of Sawney Darwood and Bill Roberts, the court heard that during his violent, deadly rages, Robert would believe that his victims were actually his parents. Reliving the abuse he had suffered by the hands of his parents, his lawyer argued that the killings had been the result of pent-up aggression from the systematic abuse he had suffered for many years. Robert said himself, "When I kill, I have my parents in mind. If I had killed my parents back in 1970, none of these people need have died. If I had killed them, then I would be walking around a free man without a care in the world." Robert would later go on to be convicted for the double murder. Now convicted for the double murder, Robert was surprisingly sent back to Wakefield Prison. Upon arrival, Robert discovered that his reputation preceded him. Considered to be a dangerous prisoner with fellow inmates dubbing him Hannibal the Cannibal and Brain Eater, making sure to keep their distance, believing him to be psychotic and unpredictable. The governor of the prison refused to place Robert in general population for his safety and the safety of other prisoners, so he'll be placed in solitary confinement. Robert did actually spend time in Parkhurst and on the Isle of Wight. Whilst on the Isle of Wight, Robert met a psychiatrist called Dr. Bob Johnson, and Dr. Bob Johnson would spend 3 years interviewing and counselling Robert, believing that Robert was making great progress and 3/4 of the way through moving the aggression and violence that made him such a danger. Although Robert seemed to be doing well, one day without warning, the treatment abruptly ended, resulting in Robert being sent back to Wakefield, where he had once been a monster. Robert's brother Paul Maudsley said, "As far as I could tell, the prison authorities are trying to break him. Every time they see him making a little progress, they throw a spanner in the works." He spent time in Wood Hill prison, and in Wood Hill, he got on well with the staff, even playing chess with them. He had access to books, movies, and he had a television. Now they put him in a cage in Wakefield. His trouble started because he got locked up as a kid. All they do when they put him back there is bring all that trauma back to him. Robert agreed with Paul's statement, later adding, "All I have to look forward to is further mental breakdowns and possible suicide. In many ways, I think this is what the authorities hope for. That way, the problem of Robert John Maudsley can be easily and swiftly resolved." In 1983, Robert was considered to be the most dangerous prisoner in the UK prison system, so the prison system planned to construct a special cell as Robert was deemed too much of a threat to be in general population. The prison authorities had a 2-cell unit built in the basement of F Wing in Wakefield Prison. The cell was referred to as the glass cage, because of the resemblance to Hannibal Lecter's cell. The cell being 5.5 meters by 4.5 meters is slightly larger than the average cell. The cell has large bulletproof windows through which Robert could be observed. The only furniture that Robert had been given was a single table and chair, both made entirely from compressed cardboard. This new cell was considered to be a long-term solution for Robert, whereas due to the notoriety of his crimes, he would never be considered for release. The new cell had a solid steel door that opens up into a small cage within the cell, encased in thick perspex, with a small slot at the bottom where the guards would pass Robert his food and other items. This is where Robert Maudsley would be forced to remain. Known as prisoner 467637, would be left to serve his sentence in complete isolation, spending 23 hours a day in a cell with only a small window that gives a view of a brick wall, and for the other hour, Robert is allowed to exercise. During this hour, he is accompanied by no less than 6 prison guards, who also escort Robert to and from his cell. As Robert isn't allowed any contact with any of the other prisoners, you could imagine that this was a very lonely time for him. In the early years of the glass cell, he would befriend insects, and for the next 12 years, left his hair and fingernails to grow, his hair becoming wispy due to no barber wanting to venture into his glass box. Robert is in such a level of isolation, and it's mind-boggling that some of the UK's sickest criminals haven't been subjected to the glass cage. This alone is enough to make you think. Despite Robert's reputation, it's also considered that he possesses a near-genius IQ. Robert regularly writes letters to prison officials describing his life behind bars, and in one letter he wrote, "It's like being buried alive in a concrete coffin." Robert would also write to the newspapers, and in one letter he wrote, "Prison authorities see me as a problem. Their solution has been to put me in solitary confinement and throw away the key, to bury me alive in a concrete coffin. I am left to stagnate, vegetate, and regress." As time went on, Robert gained other nicknames, one being Blue, being resembled to the colour his victims went before death, and Spoons, in reference to the murder of Bill Roberts, where Robert supposedly ate his brain. Although Robert isn't allowed any contact with any of the prisoners, there are other prisoners like Robert who are deemed too dangerous and have been thrown into the basement of Monster Mansion. One of those prisoners being Charles Salvador, formerly known as Charles Bronson. Charles Salvador had been sent to Wakefield Prison for his involvement in a number of hostage situations. Charles attempted to form a friendship with Robert, also suggesting that the pair should team up. Charles one day wanted to give Robert a watch. Charles Salvador asked the prison officer, "Give that to Bob." However, Robert asked the prison officer to return the gift, saying, "I'm never getting out. What do I want a watch for?" Charles took offense, as the watch that he wanted to give as a gift had been returned, and allegedly said, "I'm going to kill you when I see you." Robert would oftenly joke in reply back with, "You've never killed anyone, you soft." Reportedly, the two had a love-hate friendship, as at times they would get on and other times they'd clash. One day, Charles left his trademark John Lennon sunglasses in the gym, and Robert had found them. Charles was unhappy and had threatened to sue the prison system for £250. Robert eventually returned the glasses, telling the prison officer to tell Charlie to stick them up his. Although Robert has become resigned to his fate inside his Perspex cell, since the year 2000, Robert has made several requests to prison officials asking for the terms of his imprisonment to be relaxed and that he be allowed a pet budgie, but this request had been denied. Robert then made another request. This was to be granting him permission to commit suicide through the use of a cyanide capsule. That same year, a lady by the name of Jane Heaton began writing to Robert and has visited him several times. Jane had said, "Since getting to know Bob, I have seen many prison documents about him. Everyone concentrates on the crimes that he committed 25 years ago. It's as if they are living in a time loop, and no one is prepared to look at how he is now. I would like to see him get an independent review on his condition and find a suitable course of treatment for him." Robert eventually went to court on a bid to be allowed to die, and he also wrote a letter. In the letter he asked why he couldn't have a pet budgie, promising to love it and that he would not eat it, also asking why he couldn't have a television to see the world. Robert then ended the letter by saying, "If the prison service says no, then I ask for a simple cyanide capsule which I shall take willingly, and the problem of Robert John Maudsley can be easily and swiftly resolved." In 2010, 10 years after asking why he couldn't have a television, Robert put forward a request asking if he could play board games with the prison officers. Newspapers then headlined, "Robert asked because he was bored." Understandable, as he's been in solitary with no stimulation for decades now. Due to Robert's reputation, it was deemed unsafe and denied. In 2019, Robert Maudsley's nephew Gavin Maudsley had said, "He likes to write us letters and tell me what he's been watching on TV," that indicating that Roberts has finally received a television. Gavin also said, he really likes the wildlife programs, the Attenborough ones, things like that. There were also reports of a PlayStation 2, but all this information is a bit scarce and unconfirmed. Now in 2023, at the age of 70, Robert John Maudsley remains in the glass box. He has spent more than 16,500 consecutive days in isolation, and will remain isolated under F-Wing in Monster Mansion. Imprisoned 48 years ago in 1974, he is Britain's longest serving prisoner. A murderer who spent time in a cell next to Roberts had said, "I felt like we were being psychologically murdered. The system's treatment of Bob was totally dehumanizing. To hold someone in an underground cage for almost 40 years is unforgivable. What Bob did in terms of murdering sex offenders is obviously wrong. But what the system has done to Bob is psychological torture. There are other ways of dealing with prisoners like Bob." Gavin Maudsley also said, "I'm not condoning what he did. He did very bad things, but he didn't kill a child or a woman. An innocent person didn't go to work that day and never return home. The people he killed were also really bad people." So currently there is a petition online for better conditions for Robert at www.change.org. Do you think that he should be buried alive in his concrete coffin and be left to stagnate, vegetate and regress? Or do you think that he should have some better conditions? If you would like to stick around for a short while and hear what I think, feel free. If not, thank you for listening and take care. So my thoughts on this case is a bit crazy, really. So I don't feel like he should really be where he is. I still believe he should be in prison for what he's done, but I don't believe he should be treated the way he's being treated now. For the people that he killed, I mean, like his nephew said, they're very bad people already, so it doesn't really make it right. It's not really justified, but at the same time, you know, he didn't take off. He didn't kill a banker. He didn't kill someone who contributes to society when they're gonna get out. He killed someone who traumatizes people, young children who would then grow up to be traumatized, or traumatize people themselves. You know, and that's the kind of thing I think about. I do believe he should be locked up, but like the other fellow prisoner said, I couldn't find his name through sources, but he said, you know, there's other ways of dealing with prisoners like Bob. And I totally agree. You know, maybe if you put him on a wing where there wasn't sex offenders, you know, maybe see if he would actually kill anybody then. I know he killed Salni Darwood for the murder of his wife, but, you know, it's kind of that same thing. It's kind of, he killed people who preyed on vulnerable people. So, he was kind of like a dark angel in a sense. I'm not looking at him like that because I still think killing is wrong, of course, but, you know, you can kind of point it in that direction because he was abused as a child, he was essayed as a child, and the people he murdered were people of that, you know, background. So, definitely understandable. But, you know, the fact that he has to sit inside a cage and he's not allowed to play board games, he can't have a book or anything like that, he can't have a TV. When the newspapers said, you know, they headlined and they said, murderer is bored, he wants to play board games. I mean, sure, you lock anybody up for long enough without any stimulation, they're gonna be bored. So, you know, I think the newspapers just wanted a little story there, and I don't know. It's kind of unfair. Very unfair. I mean, if you know Charlie Bronson as well, also known now as Charles Salvador, he is one of the most longest serving prisoners also, and he's never even killed anybody. And these are the things that made me think, you know, of course they were violent people, they've done silly things and all of that. It's almost like they're just playing a game with their lives in a sense. Like that guy said, it's psychological torture, it's psychological murder. He shouldn't be left inside that box to stagnate, vegetate and regress. He should be punished for what he did, but I feel like at the same time, think about the victims for the people who did die, like as in the sense, Bill Roberts. So Bill Roberts is dead now. What about Bill Roberts' victim? You know, like, isn't that kind of, I don't know, it's like a payback thing, I guess. But definitely, I mean, I'm one of them people who want to sign the petition for better living conditions for Robert. I do believe that, you know, he should be allowed a television to see the outside world. I do believe he should be able to play board games if, you know, other people are comfortable to do so. It's, you know, other prisoners are allowed it. You know, you see all these things. I see all these things personally on YouTube, etc. I see prisoners with Xboxes, with the latest games, with phones, and whether they're allowed them on, oh well, obviously they're allowed an Xbox, because how are you going to conceal that? But if they're allowed it, then he should be allowed it too. There is no difference, I don't believe. And for as far as the brain eating goes, you know, I saw sources saying that there was actually no evidence on the autopsy, but I tried to leave out all of the things that seemed unconfirmed because there's not a lot of news on Robert, unfortunately. All you could go off is what the family members had said, and obviously not really wanting to be rude, but that's kind of biased, you know. It's kind of like someone else saying, oh, you know, my friend's a really good guy, but, you know, your friend killed 4 innocent people, so it's a bit hard, but yeah, it's also weird because there were reports of him playing a PlayStation and stuff like that, but also they were really scarce, so you don't know. But I hope he has better living conditions at the moment. I mean, it's only been 2 years since I saw the reports of him actually getting some stimulation, but hopefully. But it'll be great to know what you guys think of Robert John Maudsley himself. Don't really, not is he a hero, is he a demon or anything like that, just if he deserves the better conditions, if he deserves more of a life, as in the sense, something to do, Sure, you should be punished for what you've done, but I don't think you should be sat there staring at a wall 24 hours a day, or 23 hours a day, and you get out for the 1 hour. But still, it's not enough. It's really not enough. When there are child abusers, it's almost like they are the most protected criminals in the English prison system, and it's crazy. It's crazy, Other people would be sitting there saying, well, yeah, he's a good guy, he's a really good guy because he got rid of the scum of the earth. It's true, it's not true, it's, however it is. But thank you for listening, and hope you guys take care. Please put in the comments what you think of Robert John Maudsley and if he should get some stimulation. And if you really think he should, please go and sign a petition at www.change.org. Thank you.